Good morning, guys. Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid. It's a special day today. It's Friday, July 27, 2018, and it's the first day that I am officially no longer employed by my former employer. And you guys who've been watching know I wake up between 4:30 and 5. I was up before 4 this morning, and it's because I was excited to get out here and now once again full-time be homesteading, gardening, being with my family is the biggest thing, writing, doing the things I enjoy, and no longer going to a job that I hated because it made me miserable because I no longer have that job. And the people at my job are probably wondering where I am today because I was scheduled to work through the weekend. And it's just an example of the ineptitude that goes on there. But when I turned in my 2 weeks notice, 2 weeks and a day ago, which I worked out every single day of my 2 weeks notice, and I did my job to the best of my ability. I didn't shirk my responsibilities. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't steal anything. I didn't break anything. And I did this because it was important to me, not because of my employer. And I've shared in other videos before about, doing the right thing and things I've learned. I wasn't always like this. When I was in college, I had a job. I was working 2 jobs at one time, and it was just too much, and so I quit one, and I didn't handle that the right way. I just didn't go back. It was a restaurant job. Well, I'd gotten this job because 2 friends of mine were friends with a guy that managed the place, and they were upset with me, and that really cost me a friendship. So I learned, and I'm just trying not to repeat it. And I ended up getting this job with my former employer due to the recommendation of 2 very good friends of mine, Gary and Lori. Shout out to Gary and Lori. And if I would have just stopped going, that would have made them look bad too, because they went to their contacts there and said, look, this guy needs a job. We know him. He's a pretty good guy. So I wasn't going to do that to them. So that's, a lot of people were like, why are you even here? People I worked with, they were like, why are you even here? Man, if I was able to leave this place, I wouldn't even let them know. They don't let you know before they fire you. Well, that has everything to do with them and nothing to do with me. So it was important for me to work out that 2 weeks notice. But today is Friday, July 27th, the day after I officially quit. So we have a picture. A lot of folks have said in the comments, you should smile more. I'll try. I'm smiling now because I'm done with that place. But we took a picture of me holding up my 2 weeks notice written in crayon. And ironically, when I revealed my former employer here, it's done in crayon. I mean, this all kind of started with a crayon. It's going to end with a crayon. And this is a magical crayon. And I know that makes me sound nuts, but I'm going to tell you the story behind the crayon that I found this morning. The only crayon in my office upstairs. So anyway, my wife took the picture and she says, we're going to save this picture. And she saved it on her phone that I'm using. And I said, yeah, we're going to save it because that has the date to prove when I quit. And she goes, no, that's not why I want to save it. She says, this is the first time I've seen you smile like this in 6 months. So we have the picture. I came home from work yesterday. I'm like, honey, pull up that picture of my notice. I want to make sure. So she did. And yeah, it was dated, 2 weeks from now, July 26th. It said will be my last date available to work for you. And so I'm done. So if you're wondering where Lake is this morning, he doesn't work for you anymore, okay? And I know they'll see this because I had a guy sneak up to me at work yesterday, all conspiratorial. Shh, hey, come here. So I go over, I'm like, yeah? He goes, he's looking around, he's making sure no one's watching. He's like, man, I was on YouTube yesterday and this video popped up and I was like, hey, I think I know that guy. And I clicked on it and it was you. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I've been hearing this a lot the last couple of weeks. And he's like, man, I watched some of your other videos where you're talking about this place. I'm like, yeah. He goes, he's looking around. Don't let anybody here know you're making these videos because they'll rat you out. So I get down real close to him. I'm looking around, making sure no one's looking. I said, hey, they already know. So anyway, I know they'll see this. So if you're wondering where I am today, I'm not there because I don't work for you anymore. All right, now, a bit of backstory. I know you guys who have been watching are saying, get on with it. We've been waiting for 2 weeks. Well, I'm going to give a bit of backstory, and I'm telling this for 3 people, 2 groups of people and 1 individual. The first group of people I'm telling this story for are my coworkers I'm leaving behind. And again, it's not my responsibility to their story is worth telling, and I I did come to know some of these people very well. I came to care for these people, so their story needs told. However, with that said, like I said in an earlier video, if you decide to stay and continue to work under these conditions, that choice is yours. No one can make the choice for you to leave. No one made the choice for me to leave except me. There are, like I mentioned in a video the other day, there are more jobs in this economy now than there are people to fill those jobs. And this is the first time we've seen this since just after World War II. So saying you can't find another job is no longer a viable excuse. I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, the second group of people I'm telling this story for and revealing who my former employer was is because, well, it's the customers we service. They're not receiving the service that they're entitled to and that they deserve and that other folks around the country get. And they asked me, why is this? And well, and this is a question that the mainstream media wanted answered a year ago. They would literally camp out in our lobby. They would try to catch up with carriers on their routes and ask them what's going on, and the people weren't allowed to answer the questions. So the people that we service never got the answers. Well, I'm going to give you those answers today. And then thirdly, and most importantly, this video is for a specific individual and who is key to this story. And we'll get to that at the end, and you'll understand. So anyway, backstory. I had been working at this place. It was 6 months almost to the day, a few days. Well, it was 2 days, my last day was 3 days shy of 6 months exactly. And we went through a 90-day probationary period where, you know, we had to work 6 days a week, and it was up to 12 hours a day, sometimes till 10 o'clock at night out there delivering on the streets. And we weren't allowed to call off. If we called off sick or whatever, in that first 90 days, it was grounds for immediate termination. So we make it through this 6-month probationary, 3-month probationary period. That's how long it was. It was 90 days. 90 days. I want to make sure there's no confusion. Me and the group of folks I came through with, we make it through our 90-day probationary period. And then the person in charge of our facility tells us, okay, now you get no days off indefinitely until further notice. So just when we're starting to think, hey, maybe we'll get, this coming Sunday will be the first Sunday I didn't work in 6 months. We worked Sundays, we worked holidays. I worked on Mother's Day, 13 hours I worked on Mother's Day. And guys, I'm blessed. You know, my wife, a lot of guys were coming to work that day and they were talking about how their wives were upset and angry and screaming at them for not calling out on Mother's Day because they wanted them to take them to dinner. I didn't have that problem. A lot of you have seen my wife in our other videos. You know she's a precious gem. And I apologized to her on Mother's Day when I had to go in and work 13 hours. It ended up being, I said, I'm sorry, honey, that I can't take you out to a nice dinner. And she said, you don't have anything to apologize for. She says, I am blessed. I am blessed that on Mother's Day you were willing to go to work to take care of me and our son. Guys, I couldn't have done what I did for so long without this woman. I couldn't be where I am today without her. And I made a video about how she's the most amazing woman I've ever known. She was going to work 8 hours a day in the Philippines to make $2 a day while I was pursuing writing, which eventually would lead to us being able to come to the U.S. And, you know, they say behind every great man, and I'm not a great man, there is a great woman. I'm a below average, mediocre man. But there is a great woman, and she doesn't stand behind me. She stands in front of me, and she pulls me forward. So here I am rambling, getting derailed again. But so we worked Mother's Day. We worked Memorial Day, which was difficult for me because, you know, I served in Iraq. And but I worked Memorial Day with other veterans and with people who aren't veterans but who respect veterans and who, you know, they worked Memorial Day. So anyway, now we're told after 90 days, you don't get a day off. You're going to work 7 days a week straight until further notice. I made it 16 days before, you know, the night before that, I fell asleep driving, went off the road, fortunately woke up in time, but it was enough to let me know, you know, I can't do this. And so I went to work the next day, told my supervisors, I'm not coming in tomorrow, told them about falling asleep behind the wheel. I called out, and it's the first time I'd ever done that. And that didn't sit well with me. I called out sick when I wasn't sick. I was exhausted, I was worn out, and I was not safe. There are so many cyclists where I live, and I doze off, you know, going off the road's one thing, but I doze out at the wrong time. I could run over one of these men or women out here on their bicycles. Nothing good was coming of this, so I called out. I knew I needed a doctor's note or whatever, so I was trying to just kind of cover my butt because I needed the job, at the time. And so I went to the VA, and they're wonderful people, and met with the doctor who spent a couple hours with me, referred me to a psychiatrist, went and talked to him, and he gave me a note. And this guy, and if you've been following, you know about this, but a lot of folks are here for the first time, so I'm just giving you, background. The psychiatrist had practiced at the time for 27 years. He's a retired full bird colonel from the United States Army. And he told me, he said, at the beginning, he said, look, why are you here? I mean, this guy was no nonsense. He was strictly business. And I told him, I said, well, I'm kind of being overworked, and it's bringing back some insomnia and some nightmares that I know are associated with my PTSD. And I haven't had these issues in many years because I've never been under this type of stress in many years. I intentionally avoid this type of stress. I said, I kind of need some help. And he said, look, if you're looking for me to write you a note, I'm not going to do it. He says, I've never done that because I don't believe in malingering. I don't believe in getting you, light duty, and it's not going to happen. But let's talk. You've got an hour, and let's see if there's anything I can do to help. So I just kind of told him what was going on, kind of what I just told you. And he said, well, our hour's almost up. He says, how should I word this note? And I was like, wait a minute, you said you don't do this. And he says, look, you're not looking for light duty. He says, I'm going to write, and it's right here. Basically, I'm going to clear you to work 50 hours a week. That's 125% of a full workload, and that's enough for anybody. But I'm going to recommend that this is done over a 5-day period. You need a couple days off. Everybody, not just veterans, every human being needs a break. You can't work like this indefinitely 16 days. Some of the folks went 20 days and then started having breakdowns on the floor, crying, and were sent home. Well, it's not because they're weak or they're wimps. It's because they'd worked 20 plus days straight without a break. And these are, I mean, I've mentioned in other videos, I walk up to 12 miles a day at times. It's physical. It's hot out there. So he writes this note. And again, this is backstory. Most of you have heard it. He put in here, Mr. Lake, that's me. And I know this is personal medical information, and I'm sharing it because this is about helping someone. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about spite. And at the very end of this video, when I address a specific person for whom this video is really being made, you're going to understand that. But he says, Mr. Lake suffered significant trauma and losses during his deployment to Iraq in 2008-2009. After his return, he developed significant psychiatric problems, including post-traumatic stress disorder, major depression, and substance abuse. His recovery has been lengthy with numerous setbacks. The current excessive demands of, fill in the blank, the employer, and I'm getting to it, are exacerbating his condition and causing him significant medical harm. He even put my diagnosis in here, folks. Post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic, major depressive episode, recurrent, moderate, which means it's, these things come back to haunt me when I get in situations like this. He put substance use disorder in remission, which means for the time and for some time I have been clean and sober. Praise God, it's his doing, not mine. So anyway, his assessment. Mr. Lake is a high-functioning and competent professional who's been able to manage in the safe environment of Virginia. Due to the intense demanding nature of his current work environment, including the length of days and number of days in a row without a break, his condition is being exacerbated, causing significant stress and negatively impacting on his health. Recommendation: Mr. Lake should not be required to work more than 10 hours per day and no more than 5 days per week. This is a medical professional with 27 years experience, retired full bird colonel, basically saying in a very professional way, what you're doing to this guy is not safe. He's come a long way to get to where he is, and you're basically pushing him backwards, not forward. I gave this letter, and there are witnesses. My union shop steward was with me. We gave this to the person in charge of our local facility here in Charlottesville. She read it, she held it up, and she said, as she dropped it onto her desk, this don't mean nothing here. Yeah, it does. This is America. And any freedom you think you have, ma'am, you have because people like me did what we did so that you can do what you do. She further went on to tell me that what I could do about it. I could grieve this with the union. I could go to the health nurse. I could go to HR, and if I did, she implied that she would punish my paycheck. She didn't say those exact words. She implied it. She said, if I'm forced to honor this, I'm going to schedule you to come in at noon. I stand up to bullies. This is not a this is an issue of bullying, and I was being bullied, so I stood up to her. I did go to the union. I did go to HR. I did go to the health nurse. Within 2 days or 3 days, she was forced to honor this note. True to her word, she started scheduling me to come in at noon. So in essence, my next paycheck was roughly 46.8% less than what I'd been accustomed to. Now, I know, of course, I was backing off my hours, but if you do the math, if I were to get the 50 hours a week, the paycheck would have been close to the same. It would have been enough for me and my family, but as it was, being cut nearly in half, it wasn't enough. And so my wife and I were talking about this, and my son, Daniel, overheard it. And, my wife's like, what are we going to do? And my son's like, what do Dad, you stood up to a bully and the bully retaliated and things got worse. And I said, yeah, well, what you do is you just keep standing up. And sometimes standing up means removing yourself from the situation and going another route, kind of like what we're doing here. Because, and I shared this in another video, one of the things I've learned throughout life is that I can choose to be right or I can choose to be happy. And sometimes, though, I can't choose both. And sometimes, I spent the first 40 years of my life trying to be right. And I mentioned in the other video, I'm now making the choice to be happy. My wife and I went over our finances. We looked at our various forms of revenue we have coming in from writing, social media, other areas, and we looked at our other options. And before I worked at this place, I did some temping. And guys, if you're in the Charlottesville, Albemarle County, Virginia area, some of my former co-workers, if you're watching this, there's a wonderful temping agency here in Charlottesville called Manpower. I've used them. I'm on their rolls. They message me once a month and they're like, hey, we could use you. Are you ready to come back for some temp work? That's an option we have, and it's an option we may pursue if we have to go that route, but I do have an option. So we said, okay, let's be happy. I did the right thing by going to the union, by going to HR, but I know that these are relatively ineffective acts. Kim58, shout out to Kim58 subscriber. She said in a comment last night that she's told people for years, HR is not there for the employees. HR is there for the entity for whom the employees work. It's all about keeping the machine running. That's true. I mean, they'll go in perhaps and maybe they'll be seen, make themselves noticeable, but nothing's going to come of this. The culture of this employer, and I'm getting ready to reveal it with my crayon, is not to get rid of abusive management or ineffective management. It's to transfer them to another institution. So at the end of the day, will this bully lose their job? No, and that's not my goal. I'm not trying to get anyone here fired. This person at most will be transferred to another branch where they will continue this behavior. That's just how it goes. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and get on with it. Who is my former employer? Where did I just quit? It was the United States Postal Service. For the last 6 months, up until yesterday, I've been a city carrier's assistant for the United States Postal Service. I've been delivering mail. I've been delivering parcels and packages, mostly for Amazon, in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I've been fortunate to meet a lot of wonderful people, not just people I worked with, but the people that I would deliver to daily. I met a lot of wonderful people out there. I mentioned in a video earlier in the week, or maybe last week, how wonderful the people in Charlottesville are and how wonderful the people in Albemarle County, Virginia are, and they don't deserve the service they're getting, or rather the service they're not getting. I mean, these folks, and I mentioned before, there were some bad things that happened here about a year ago, and a lot of people saw this in the news, and this is their opinion of Charlottesville. This is all they know of Charlottesville, that and the University of Virginia is here. If that's all you know about Charlottesville, you don't know anything about Charlottesville. The people in Charlottesville are the most wonderful people in the world, and I've been around the world several times, many continents, many countries, many places. The last couple weeks it was hot. It was in the 90s, and I'm out there walking up to 12 miles a day delivering mail, and 6 or 8 times a day, numerous times a day, I've lost count. I would be walking up to a house to deliver the mail, the door's opening, and there's somebody with a glass of water. 6 or 8 times a day. Or there's somebody asking, would you like some water? Would you like something to drink? And most times I said, yes, of course. There were people out there who, if I said, no, thank you, actually the woman 4 houses up just gave me some water, but thank you. One woman said, hey, I work from home. If you're ever out here and you need water or you need anything, you bang on my door and I'll hear you and I'm going to come give you what you need. A woman just up the road from her said, hey, if I'm not home, you go around to my spigot, my water hose is there, you turn on that water and you take what you need. And I took these people up on it. And these are the people that I'm telling this story for, because they asked me these questions. There's a wonderful woman named Lisa that's in a neighborhood. I'll tell you a little bit about her here without revealing who she is. I don't want to, that's not what this is about. But I was out there last week and I'm walking into her yard with a package and she's in the yard and she comes limping across the yard, limping, and you can see the pain on her face. She's in a grimace, and I'm thinking, what, because I've talked to this woman several times out there for the months I've been working there. Her and her husband have a beautiful garden. It's like they're homesteading on the grid. They have chickens, they have a garden, and their neighbors, Tom and Brenda across the road, have a beautiful garden, and we're talking about gardening every time I go through there. And Lisa says, there you are, thank God, I've been waiting on this. I waited all day yesterday, and it was a heavy package. She said, my husband and I were both home. At least one of us were home, because both of us were home most of the day. We were waiting on this. We got the email that it was out for delivery. I desperately needed this. And then at just a few minutes before 8 p.m., we got an email that it couldn't be delivered because there was no access to my property. What is going on here? And her property is perfectly accessible. What it was is Lisa had recently had hip surgery, and Lisa was at least a month away from being able to drive again, and Lisa was on this home rehab program, and the box was heavy because it had rehabilitation equipment in it, some weights or whatever for some exercises she had to do to rehab so she wouldn't have to limp. So here she is having this medical conditioning. She orders something through Amazon Prime to get the fastest delivery she can get, and Amazon has this contract with the post office. We're delivering so many of their parcels for them. She didn't get it, and she didn't understand why she didn't get it, because there was nothing blocking access to her property. There was no pit bull with rabies blocking her mailbox on her porch, and there was no beat up old pickup truck on cinder blocks blocking she lives in a beautiful neighborhood, one of my favorite neighborhoods in Charlottesville. There's no trucks on blocks blocking her walkway. So she asked, how was this property not accessible? And so I didn't sign any non-disclosure agreements, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but Lisa, I want to answer your question now that I can. One of the problems, as I see it, with the post office in Charlottesville is that it is severely understaffed. There are not enough carriers to get the work done. And I shared with you how I was treated. Maybe it's because this is how they're treated. But there's a supervisor there that I spoke with just a few days ago, and I said, I want honest figures. In your mind, you've been with the post office over 30 years. How many more carriers does the Charlottesville post office need to get this job done? And she looked at me and she said between 20 and 25. Without a doubt, we are 20 to 25 carriers short every day. So you've got carriers who are delivering entire routes, 1/3 or 1/4 of another route, and then when they think they're done, they're being sent out to help another carrier, and a lot of times that was me, who's still delivering their route. We're just done. So Lisa, now here's why you got the email saying your property had no access to it. Mail doesn't matter anymore, at least in Charlottesville. We're told, if you got 2 hours left to go, because you're supposed to be back by 8, because I guess the heat was coming down about carriers being out past 8 and safety issues. I mean, I personally was out after, till 10 o'clock, making my last delivery at 10 o'clock at night in the dark at times. So they're trying to figure out how to get us back in earlier for our safety. So we're told you be back by 8. So let's say it's 6. I'm instructed to look around, see how much more mail and packages I have left, or before, because I don't work there anymore. And if I look and say, okay, it's going to take me about 2 hours to get all these, you can do about 20 parcels per hour. So if I got 40 or 50 packages left, I'm instructed to stop delivering mail, deliver those packages, and if I have any time left after that, go back and start delivering mail. Well, there's never any time left after that. So this is why even routes that are going out and being serviced, the end of those routes, these people are still going for 4 or 5 or 6 days or longer without getting mail, because the carriers who are severely, understaffed, never make it to the end of that route, and the mail just doesn't get delivered. And there's checks in this mail. There's important legal documents in this mail. But the post office views it as if the 50 people in that neighborhood who have packages coming are more important than the 250 other people who are waiting on their mail. So the packages come first. So let's say you get back, you're in before 8, and there's some packages that didn't get delivered. I'm going to use an example. This is a true example from my experiences. I'm not going to talk about what I think is going on. I'm going to tell you about what I've seen go on. So a couple weeks ago, and this is when the person in charge was kind of coming down on me because I'd gone above her head and get her, made sure that she was forced to honor a medical diagnosis from a retired full bird colonel in regard to a disabled combat veteran. And she wasn't happy about that. So I was out on a route. I was 20 minutes away from finishing this route, and I was instructed to come back to the office because it's all about getting back by 8, and you're going to find out why here. And also make sure I wasn't going to get any overtime. So I go back, I deliver all the packages on my route. There was 20 minutes worth of mail left. If I would have been allowed to stay out 20 more minutes, everybody on that route that day would have gotten their mail. But it's all about looking good. Got to make sure all the carriers are back before 8. So I was called back, sent out the next morning at 7 a.m. to deliver 20 minutes worth of mail. And this was on a Sunday. And who delivers mail on a Sunday, right? I did that day, and it wasn't the first time. So I'm delivering mail on Sunday. Then I go back and get all my Amazon Select parcels and spend the next rest of the day delivering packages for Amazon. That's what we do on Sundays. But sometimes we do mail too if we're being punished for whatever reason. But there was a package that I took back that day because she was screaming at me, come back. I had it underneath my mail because it was a small package, but it was a parcel select package. It wasn't for that route. It was for the next route over, which happened to be on my Amazon delivery route, so I knew where this house was. And so after I delivered the mail, I was going to go take this package, drop it off, and then go back to the post office. But I wasn't allowed to do that. I was ordered back. So I went back, and I thought, oh no, I've got a package. She's going to be livid. So I go in. Here's this package. It's 7:56 or something. I barely made it back before 8. And she goes, why'd you bring this package back? And I told her what I just told you. She goes, scan it, no access. And okay, no access means I went to that property, I went to that home. I couldn't access that property because there was something blocking the mail receptacle, or there was a dog I wasn't familiar with that I didn't know if it was safe or not. This wasn't the case. I never went to this house. So I said, ma'am, did I hear you correctly? Did you just tell me to scan this package, no access? And she said, come on, Lake, we got to stop the clock on this one. Scan it, no access. So I scanned it, no access. Now, what she meant by stop the clock on this one is the United States Postal Service signed into a contract with Amazon where the Postal Service promised, we can deliver these packages for you. We'll do it in the time frame in which you said to do it. We'll do it by the day or by the time on these days in which you said to do it. Well, if I hadn't scanned that package, no access, if I had scanned it not delivered, or if I just not scanned it, it would have, after 8 o'clock, it would have been called a failure, which meant we failed to do what we said we were going to do. And this jeopardizes the contract with Amazon. So this is why Lisa, back to my point here, Lisa's limping through her yard asking me, why did this package, this is more than likely what happened. I'm not saying this is what happened, but this is an example of how these things happen. Whoever had your route the day before didn't get around to you, and Lisa is towards the end of this route, and your package didn't get delivered because there simply wasn't time. We're understaffed. They are understaffed. I'm not part of the we anymore. And that package was obviously scanned no access because you got the email saying that it was. And folks, the people in Charlottesville deserve better. The people in Albemarle County deserve better. And so I mentioned in another video I had solutions, or as I saw it. I'm not a genius, but this is what I think the solution is. The quick solution for the Charlottesville branch is that they need people sent in here from somewhere else to get the job done for now. But that's just putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches. but they need help immediately. Long term, and this is where we might part ways in our thinking, but I think it's just the time has come to fully and completely privatize the United States Postal Service. They are still a government bureaucracy. They're a government agency. They were privatized in the 70s, as in they have to generate their own revenues. They do it through postage. Everybody complains about junk mail. Guys, it's not going to stop because that's where the post office makes their money. And now they're making money from this contract with Amazon. I don't know how much. I've looked for numbers. They seem to be hidden. But this is why you're not getting your mail now, even less so than you were before, because obviously they're making pretty good money on Amazon. And like I said, it's more important for the 50 folks in your neighborhood who have an Amazon delivery coming. It's more important for them to get their packages than it is for you to get your mail. So it must be a pretty lucrative contract. But anyway, we know how private corporations work. There's accountability. There's shareholders you have to answer to. If UPS, if FedEx gave the same service in Charlottesville that the United States Postal Service does, UPS and FedEx would be out of business. Word would get out, people would sell the shares, it would go into a tailspin, and they'd be out of business. Knowing this, UPS and FedEx make sure not to give the service that the United States Postal Service does. As a government bureaucracy and as people with a government mindset, the post office really has no accountability. I mean, you can call your local post office. If you're in Charlottesville, you can call the post office and complain. You know, the clerks there, I'm friends with several clerks, they hate working the window. They love the people, they love the customers, but they know it's going to be all day of customers coming up saying, we haven't gotten our mail in 5 days, what's going on? And they're technically not allowed to give the real answer, the answer being the one I just gave you. So, you know, people have said, I've read articles for and against privatizing the post office entirely. And a lot of people say, no, we can't do this. It's, you know, it's in our Constitution for them to be there. And it's a beautiful part of our history. It is a beautiful part of our history, folks. But it's not because it's been run by the government. Actually, the first post office was in a pub in Massachusetts when we were a colony. So actually, the postal service in our country technically predates our government. The post office has always been a beautiful thing because it's always evolved to match societal needs. You know, they went from delivering on horseback to trains to airplanes. Once upon a time, it was a safe haven for veterans. There's a lot of Vietnam vets who have retired from the post office because when they came home from war, the post office was a safe haven for them to go. They were secured a job. They could take care of their family and they could be treated respectfully. Not so anymore. So guys, we know what happens when something doesn't evolve. It becomes extinct. And I believe through what I've seen in the last 6 months and what little bit I know about business from having been a broker for 6 or 8 years, is that the post office has passed that point of evolution. It refuses to evolve. And again, this is just my opinion. But if they had shareholders, if they had to worry about the bottom line, and if people who were abusive management got fired instead of being transferred to a different branch, if all these things were to change, Lisa probably would have gotten her rehab equipment on time and she would have been 1 day or 2 days closer to her full recovery. The people who are waiting, you know, who get checks in the mail on the 1st of the month would be getting those checks in the mail on the 1st of the month, not the 8th and the 10th and the 12th. This was a common concern people brought up with me when I was delivering. You know, there are cluster boxes in Charlottesville where I've gone and I couldn't deliver the mail because the numbers are not on the inside of the boxes and you don't know where it goes. The regular carrier that has that route knows, but he or she hasn't been given the time to go in and number them for the assistants on their days off to do it. No one in management is doing it because that regular carrier has to deliver his or her route half of another and then go help someone else after that. Private corporation would have those boxes numbered because if those customers weren't getting their mail every day, those customers would complain. They would stop doing business with that entity and the stock would go into the tailspin and the company would go out of business. So that's my take on it. And now I'm going to end with this. I was telling this story for my coworkers, the people we served, and one other person. I'm telling this story for the most important person in my life, and that's my son, who I'm getting ready to go snuggle with here. So I've got to wrap this up. And who I'm going to be snuggling with for a long time today because I'm not going to have to interrupt our snuggling to take a shower to go to work. About a year ago, my son was coming home from school with bruises. He had bruises on his arms. We asked him what was going on, and he didn't want to talk about it. We gave him some space. A few days, we finally called him to the mat and said, what's going on? He was being bullied on his bus. And there was a kid, an older kid, who was, when my son would talk, he would grab his arms and he would squeeze and he would tell him he wasn't allowed to talk. And when, hold on. When we found this out, we told our son that we would deal with it. And he said, no, don't. He says, I don't want the other kids to know I told on the bullying. I don't want the bully to be meaner to me if we tell. My son's bus driver is a man named Rick. The Albemarle County school system should feel honored to have this man. Rick's a wonderful man. He gives us plans for our homestead, and my wife bakes some banana bread. I went to Rick the next day. I told him what was going on, and Rick dealt with it. He separated the kids, and this was about halfway through the school year, and my son was never bullied by this kid again. And at the end of the year, the best part of this story is that my son and his bully were friends. And, you know, this is a good ending for the story for this kid that was a bully. He's not a bully anymore. And I told my son when we went through this, we don't back down from bullies. We don't cower down, because all it takes for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. But I told my son, and these are the words of a man much more wise than me, evil is powerless when the good are unafraid. So I made this video for my son to show that just like last year when we dealt with his bully issue, Daddy's going to deal with his bully issues. And that whether you're 7 years old and you're being bullied by somebody a couple years older than you, even when you're 44 years old, you can be bullied by somebody who's in a position to bully you. Maybe it's an employer, maybe it's a superior at work. But whether it's a kid that's 2 years older, half a foot taller and 50 pounds heavier than you, or even if your bully is the size of the United States Postal Service, we don't back down. We stand up to our bullies. So Daniel, you watch this when you're 7. Watch it when you're 20. Watch it when you're 40. We never back down from a bully. And that's it, folks. As always, and this has been a really long video, I'm going to give you a parting shot of the homestead. Thank you to everyone who subscribed. Going forward, it's going to be videos about gardening and planting and some of the stories I have to tell, but we're not going to spend any more time on my employer because they're no longer my employer.